Welcome, everybody. My name is Matt Reichert, and I'm the Director of Outreach and Engagement for GIA Publications, and really glad that you joined us today for a Monday afternoon webinar on Gather 4th edition, specifically the making of a modern hymnal. We're going to go around the screen here and introduce everybody in a moment. Just a couple of housekeeping details. Many of you have joined us before, so you know how this works. If you haven't joined us before, you can feel free to say hello in the chat, but if you have a question that you would like us to respond to, if you could please put it in the Q&A spot down at the bottom of your screen. It's just a little bit easier for us to keep track of questions that way, and we'll do our best to answer this live. We are recording this, so if you're watching the archived version of this, welcome. We will be putting this both on our YouTube channel and on our blog site, our social media site, our website. So you have plenty of opportunities to come back if there's something you wish to revisit or a colleague that you would like to share this conversation with. Without further ado, I'm going to turn this first portion over to you, Kate, to both introduce yourself and then talk about this assembly of people we have with us today.
Sure. Well, you want me to talk about myself first? Because
yeah, of course, always.
No. I'm Kate Williams. I'm the Vice President of Sacred Music at GIA Publications, and I am excited to be with this team of panelists today who I've gotten to walk with we're just discussing this at the beginning for the last 3 years as a part of the Gather 4th edition hymnal process. I think our first meeting was September of 2018. And now here we are, September 21, and we're just days away from getting the book in the warehouse. Finally, I cannot wait. So I'll just briefly introduce everybody. I'll start in the order they appear on my screen. So sorry if it's not the same as yours, but first, there's Zak Stachowski. Zak wore many hats for us on the committee because he started the process working in Maryland, right, on the East Coast. It was super important for us to try to represent as many corners of the nation as possible. But Zak is originally from Michigan, was working on the East Coast for a while before we began this project together, and now is situated in the Minneapolis area, working in the Minnesota Catholic Mecca. And Zak, of course, is also a composer, so he was able to voice lots of different perspectives for us as a part of the committee. Selena Gokelman is in San Antonio. She works in a campus ministry type of a context at the Incarnate Word. And she's devoted her whole life to music ministry and has so much perspective to offer, but being in that context with young people and that constant kind of changing over of those who are assembled, I think she was able to keep us on our toes in a way that we wouldn't be able to do ourselves without that kind of freshness of young people and different perspectives always kind of changing. David Anderson is the editor at large at GIA Publications, and he, of course, is a voice of wisdom. That's a part of the process. We've done many hymnal projects himself. This is my first one, so I was very, very grateful to have David there to lean on and to lead us really and help us stay on track with what we know this legacy of hardbound hymnals to be at GIA. And he works kind of locally to where we are in the Chicago area in Oak Park. And he's been at his parish for 25 years?
Like 31.
Stop it. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So, wow. Talk about longevity and loyalty.
That's a long time. Yes.
Yeah. A lot of stuff too. And of course, Meredith is coming to us from New York City. And she is in a very vibrant and urban community with the Franciscan brothers, correct? Where did you go? Oh, you switched places on my screen. And she is an artist in her own right, and she's a part of a lot of music ministry across the country as we come together for our conferences and conventions. And so There, we did it. The one who's missing is Christa Silva, who is also a part of the hymnal committee. Of course, he's situated in campus ministry situation at LMU in Los Angeles. So we've got West Coast, we've got kind of our Southern family represented with Lena. We've got an urban East Coast city with Meredith. We've got Zak, who's a jack of many trades. It really felt just a privilege, such a privilege to have so many experts in this field of music ministry come together from all parts of the country to contribute to this one conversation about what should our next offering of a hardbound hymnal look like, sound like, what should it mean, who should be represented, and how can we pull this thing together. So thanks for letting me introduce everybody. It's really good to see everybody again.
Yeah, thanks, Kate, and thanks everybody for making the time to be with us. At 3 years is a long time, especially when it's something that is it's really hard. You know, I was not a member of the hymnal committee. I've been at GIA for 2 years, and so came in while this process was already well underway, and got to observe a little bit of the discernment and discussion. And I really appreciated being able to see the amount of care and thought and energy that all of you put into this process, deciding what gets to be in this hymnal that will be in parishes all over the country and all around the English-speaking world, especially when you are in all of these other corners of the country and have other responsibilities and projects and jobs and families and things. It really was apparent that it was a labor of love. So we're really grateful for that, and excited to see the fruits of it when the books arrive in-house. So Kate, you mentioned this before, that this was your first hymnal project. Of course, this is not GIA's first hymnal. It's not our first Gather hymnal. It's the 4th edition in a series, but we have several hymnal series. I'm wondering if you could describe, and David, maybe if you would add to this as well, just given your experience helping produce hymnals, what GIA's approach is, this hymnal committee structure, and maybe how that partners with our editorial staff, and how we really begin to think about putting a hymnal together through a committee structure.
Yeah, I'm happy to let David start if you'd like to.
Sure, I'd be happy to. GIA really spends a lot of time. We've already spoken a little bit about anytime in the number of hymnal committees that I've served on and that I'm aware of in the past. There's always been a kind of a priority to kind of find pastoral musicians who are in the trenches working, okay, and pastoral musicians ideally who are in different parts of the country. So we've already spoken to kind of that, kind of going to all, the various regional areas of the country. GIA has always also valued the vocation of the composer. So it's always been important to have an active composer on the committee, and that always has its challenges too, because all of us on the committee, we present music that we would like to see in the hymnal, and a composer is free to submit her music or his music, for the committee, and then there are special rules that we kind of observe when we're voting on those pieces and things like that. But so certainly, I always think a pastoral musician. A kind of a gathering of pastoral musicians, especially pastoral musicians that have a kind of a keen knowledge for the pastoral liturgy. So the liturgy piece is very important. And then the vocation of the composer, I think, is very important. A struggle we always have is with this diverse committee is kind of respecting what we might perceive as a committee as common repertoire in our country. And that's very hard to do because the Catholic community is so rich and so diverse, so varied. But most of these hymnals are geared primarily for English speaking, but we have hymnals, we have bilingual hymnals and other resources. But just to kind of keeping an eye to the common song, the common repertoire, but then always moving us towards what is the new song? What are the edges? Where do we need? Who is singing this music? And I think for me, this most recent committee, we really spent more time than any other committee that I've been on, where we really tried to constantly say, who is singing this music? You know, who is this book for? You know what I mean? And so to try to kind of move from the center and try to go to the margins a bit and just be a little more comfortable in those margin places musically, and then theologically and spiritually as a community. So the committee process is a wonderful community building process. It can be a difficult process because we all have typically every committee I've been on, and this committee especially, everybody had very, very strong opinions, and that is such a gift to kind of wrestle that through, and then hopefully at the end of the day, when we eat a lot of food or something, we get over any difficulties from the day. But anyway, that's the basic process: common repertoire, trying to establish that, looking to the new. Honoring the composer, and then really foundationally really looking to God's people who kind of are the singers of the song. So I think GIA has tried to do that a lot in all of their hymnals over the years.
Yeah, I'll say just a little bit more about the process, but I think the process itself was such a gift, and I think personally very edifying as well as informative for the work that we're trying to do together. It was absolutely clear in this hymnal, and I can see the proof of that in other hymnals at GIA too, that everyone who's a part of the hymnal committee for a GIA hymnal is absolutely in love with the work that they do and in love with the sound of God's people. And it's just a privilege to be in the midst of that love, even when we're disagreeing about stuff or we are finding ways to voice our opinions loudly, and sometimes even getting on the table for for certain things that we care a lot about. That's just a gift, to be in the presence of people who care, who genuinely care about the vocation to music ministry. So that definitely, I treasure that experience. I love that every time that we met, we began in prayer and we ended with sharing a meal. And I think that kind of small faith community type of a vibe with people who are from a diversity of experiences, practicing what we preach, or at least trying to learn to pray together, to eat with one another, and to learn how to respect the perspective of one another. That work that we ask everybody else to do at church, we also asked that of ourselves. And I think I wouldn't know how to do this hymnal process without something like that. So yeah, is there any more that we could say? Does anybody else want to chime in about process, or maybe Matt has another pointed question?
I remember, again, coming into this a year into the process or so, I remember hearing people refer to, I will or won't. It's something I would or would not get on the table for. And I just thought it was a figure of speech. I did not realize until a little later that was a literal thing that that occurred. Well,
I'm wondering. Very strong table. It was a very strong table. Must be duly noted. Strong table. I wouldn't do it on a bad table. No.
It was one time.
That's all that it took. That's all it took to make the impression. So I mean, having the general sense of the approach and all that, I'm wondering, over 3 years, there's a lot of meetings, and you build a common rapport with one another, but not every meeting is the same. So, maybe we could talk a little bit about like what happens, like what's a typical meeting agenda, or how do you move through the 3-year process? Like, where do you begin to even just wrap your arms around this? This is a big task.
Yeah, this is crazy to think about, but we met about once a month, maybe about every 6 weeks. And our last meeting was November of 2019. But about every 6 weeks in between there, we saw each other. And prior to the meeting, we would assign topics, themes, or seasons that we would be discussing at the next upcoming meeting. And every person on the committee, took that to heart, looked at their own music planning, looked through their own repertoire, gathered up all the things that they would need or that they would be interested in seeing in a hymnal, they would use if it was in a hymnal. Gathered all those things up, sent those titles in to GIA. So every time we met, we had hundreds of titles to go through. And that's in addition to the titles that are already in part of our legacy series. We would always go through the things that were in the last iteration of Gather and in our most recent hymnal, aside from Gather 4, which is Ritual Song 2nd edition. So we go through all of those pieces, hundreds of pieces, and discuss the merit of each of them, discuss how many of us use this, who actually sings this, what other types of seasons or themes might this also fit in? Does it kind of fill more than one kind of purpose? And we would discuss hundreds of songs. We would sing through them together. We would, especially if it was new, we would try to see, are there places in this song that are difficult for an assembly to catch on to right away? Is this song only really able to be done with the particular accompaniment that it's with, or does it lend itself well to those who are comfortable improvising? All of those types of conversations. And then we would vote on each song. We would vote 1 to 5, and we had little voting cards, kind of like the Olympics. And basically a 5 is, I feel strongly this hymnal absolutely has to include this piece. Number 1 is, this piece should not go in this hymnal. And 3 is, I kind of consent to the wisdom of the group. If the group leans yes, okay, leans no, no. Hundreds and hundreds of times we did this.
Hundreds.
Yeah.
So Meredith, I told you I was going to give you the first question, so I'm going to be a man of my word and give you the first question. So from the perspective of, obviously a practicing professional, a practitioner who's also a member of this hymnal committee, the process that Kate just described for all of us, like what was it like to prepare for one of these meetings? Like this is a weird way to ask it maybe, but like, how did you approach it? How did you think through a section? What kind of went through your mind as you're prepping for one of these conversations?
Like Kate said, I would go through my personal planning. I mean, I have, files and files of cycle A, B, and C from years to now, because I've been doing this for about 24 years. So I would go there to that first, but also the benefit of conferences and things like that is, you get your hands on a lot of newer stuff that isn't published, or we didn't sing in 2019 or 2017 or 2016. And I would kind of make notes of those things on my phone, just so I would say, remember to bring this song. And then, sometimes I would even forget that, but that's sort of how I went about it. I think it's important to add to the last section that we couldn't have done any of what we did without Victoria.
Oh my God.
So Victoria Zibel was our secretary. So she wrote down every word that we said, every number that we voted on, right?
That's right. She kept the receipts too.
And she's joining us, so careful. But
I love you, Zak.
We love Victoria. And Victoria is one of our main editors at GIA. So and she's amazing. She's just an amazing musician and just an amazing team member. So couldn't have done it without her.
Lena, as you think about your own preparations, I mean, all of you are in a particular, geographic context and a particular ministerial context, right? So now thinking from the perspective of being in campus ministry, especially with a student population that you don't necessarily know from year to year what their prior experience or background is, right? I mean, just planning liturgy and approaching music ministry in campus ministry is so different already. How did you bring your campus ministry experience or the uniqueness of your campus ministry experience to the discussions in the hymnal committee?
Well, I think a lot of it is knowing the people that you're ministering with and to. And so I've always had a really good relationship with my students. And like Meredith, I have years and years of hymn sheet iterations. But a lot of that discussion happens with the students. In our campus ministry, at the time, our students were the selectors of the hymns. So they had to really look at hymn texts and understand the community in which they were ministering with and to, and also see what's out there. We have a really nice physical library of all the major hymnals that are published, and all of the GIA publications. So we were very familiar with GIA publications because we'd been a GIA parish for a long time. But when the Roman Missal was edited, we had Breaking Bread. So the students had a good sense of that publisher as well. So a lot of it came from personal lists. I had been in parish ministry before, but also from years. By that point, I'd been working with students at the University of the Incarnate Word for about a dozen years. And so we'd built up about a dozen years worth of what students saw as the hymns that they felt were speaking to them and to the community. And one of the things that we talk a lot about at Incarnate Word is keeping a repository of music that's the history of the community, and that we go back to that history, but we also look to what's needed in the future or what's needed currently. And so at the time, there was a lot of stuff going on in the world, and so students had some different perspectives on what they wanted to hear. I always say that when you open up a student's playlist, it's not what you think all the time. It's not just contemporary music. It's everything. And our students are just that. They're everything. So in our lists, it was important for me to see everything, which was the diversity of our student population, but also our region, and also just to see the diversity of ethnicities. And so we have a little bit of all of that.
Yeah, thanks, Selena. Zak, I mean, I would imagine that, you know, your approach, given both your work at St. Ignatius at the time, being a composer, your work with One Call Institute and other opportunities, that I'm guessing you had some similar experience to both what Meredith and what Lena shared, and certainly feel free to add to that. I'm wondering if you would in particular speak to, other than just your own community's repertoire, what were some of sort of the guiding principles that you relied on, especially when it comes to introducing new music? For those of you who are joining us, if you look at any of the Gather 4 print materials, we'll talk a lot about like the sort of like, you know, the standard Gather repertoire, things that have been in a Gather hymnal, or GIA repertoire, things that have been in another GIA hymnal, maybe not a Gather hymnal. And then we talk about this notion of advancing repertoire, meaning something that's brand new to a Gather hymnal or brand new to a GIA hymnal, period. The new songs, the emerging things that maybe not everybody knows, but we are willing to put our chips on that piece that we are willing to bet people should know it. So Zak, I'm wondering, as you're thinking about this notion of advancing repertoire, like what are the principles that you go back to decide if you're going to bring a new thing to this committee?
Yeah, I think different maybe than Lena and Meredith, I did not consult a lot of my previous planning materials. The last couple of parishes that I have been working in had been Gather 3 parishes. So I knew that repertoire was going to get discussed, because one of our starting points at the committee are the recent hymnals that GIA had published. So I knew that had that was going to come into the mix no matter what. So I think for me, and I think David alluded to it when he talked about the vocation of the composer being a part of the hymnal committees, it was a lot about thinking about what is the role of a hymnal in advancing new music. And I think it gets to the very nature of what just the role of the hymnal is. And I think one of those things that we just talked a lot about is that a hymnal, for better or for worse, kind of cements the legacy of a song. It kind of states that this song is or should be a part of the sung treasury of our church. And that's a huge responsibility to the committee. It's an awesome power of the hymnal. And so, especially when we're talking about things that are written in maybe the last 5 to 10 years, it requires kind of a crystal ball on, for the committee, because we don't quite know yet if we only put things in that we already knew were, had made it into the fabric of what's being sung everywhere, we would have an outdated resource in the pews by the time it hit press and then, got into churches. So I thought, as far as new music, I thought a lot about the church and the world. What are the issues that are rising to the top? What's being discussed? What is important to people now that maybe would not have been as important, 20 some years ago? What kind of language are we using now? What kind of language are we cringing at now that maybe we wouldn't have given second thought to prior? Of course, this also leads towards issues of representation when we talk about composers and who it is that's written this music. So I think those are some of the principles that I think we all were grappling with when it came, especially to discussions about newer music.
No, that is a fantastic answer, Zach, and it leads into kind of an interesting question that I've been throwing around along this process, but also a great deal since. And of course, we know the church and the world has been through an awful lot in the last year and a half. And it was kind of interesting to see how the conversations we had as a committee kind of set us up in a way to perceive what the world and the church was going through in this last year and a half. I loved the conversations that we had about representation and diversity and language and appropriation. And I've also, been thinking a lot about the times that we talk about what makes a good song. And we talk about this idea of standing the test of time. This particular tune or text or combination has stood a test of time. So it has proven that it is useful for the church and it has a function and it is, and it is beautiful. There is beauty found here. And there's also this idea that, things that stand a test of time are really dependent upon the persons who live in that time. And I think that is really, if we think, like we said on the last webinar, of a hymnal as a snapshot in time, you can look at a hymnal and you can see the things that were important to these people who put this assembly of songs together. You can see the things that they were concerned about. You can see the things they wanted to offer about. And when I look at this snapshot and I see those things, the issues of representation, the issues of gender inclusivity, the issues of having texts that speak to issues like racism and immigration and lament. I just think it's really interesting that the things that we are facilitating, the ability to stand a test of time, and how similar and how different they are from a previous generation, the conversations that a previous generation was having, and the choices that they made. That's one of the things I think I'm most proud of when I look back at the work of the hymnal, is that I see those really weighty conversations that are met in absolute love and care, represented by the decisions that we made as a committee.
Lisa is asking a question. Were any songs brought back from prior editions of Gather hymnals? And I'm assuming, Lisa, you mean like if it was in a prior edition, not an edition after, did we go back to some of those earlier editions? And I don't know if we know of any off the top of our head, but I'll use this as an opportunity to say that anyone who's listening live or recorded, if you go to giamusic.com and you go to the sacred music section of our website, and you go to the Gather For webpage, you can download all of the indexes from the back of the hymnal, the actual images of the pages. So the topical index, the scriptural index, the metrical index, the first lines and common titles, you can download all of it, acknowledgements, the whole thing. So if you want to see what's in it, you can go there to see, what might have come forward. And I'll also say something at the end about how you can get both a digital and physical review copy. Going back to this line of, influences, we've been talking about this hymnal being both rooted in tradition and focused on the future. We've been talking about this as being, a depository of music that's really the treasury of our community, but also a 21st century hymnal, right? It occurs to me that, even back in 2018, 20 years into this century and this millennium, where we think about the hymnal itself differently. Some places have projection screens. We have the existence of things like One License and CCLI. Some people make worship aids. Some people use multiple resources in their pews. I'm wondering, and this is for anybody, how did you think differently about how a music director today approaches using something like a hymnal? And how did you think just differently about hymnals in this process, knowing that being a music director is different these days than perhaps it was 30 years ago, 40 years ago when the first Gather was put together?
Well, it's interesting, right? Because if there's anything that we learned from the pandemic, it's that churches are not bound by a hymnal anymore, in a way that maybe they were even just 20 years ago. And that was true prior to the pandemic as well, with as you mentioned, the use of screens, the use of worship aids with like One License or CCLI. Like, people's repertoire are no longer bound by their hardcover or softcover hymnal. So I started to think about, like, what role does a hymnal still have in such an environment as that? And I think a lot of it goes toward like what we were just discussing, because if you have a hymnal in your pews, it's perhaps one of the only church resources in the building that gets updated with some regularity, right? The lectionary doesn't change, aside from translations, things like that. But to think about how a hymnal can provide a discussion point with our assemblies about, where has music been, what has been our common repertoire, and then also a glimpse toward where music and text may go. But also it helps us to look around and say, oh, there's a church way beyond these walls that are singing songs that I don't know, and singing about things that I haven't yet sung about. And only a hymnal can really communicate that kind of holistic experience. Songs on a screen or just individual worship aids from week to week don't get you that comprehensive look. And so I was thinking a lot about that. And I think with what David said at the beginning about our discussions about the common repertoire, I know one of the things that was really eye-opening to me was that things that I thought were obviously common repertoire were things that nobody else on the committee had even heard of, or even worse, didn't like. It was a disaster anytime that happened. But a hymnal in that way, I mean, I think we can see through our music in maybe a unique way than through, some of the other artifacts that we find in our churches. We really come to know and engage with the universality of the church.
Yeah, boy, Zach, I think that's a great point. I think we've all learned through the pandemic, just about so many ways to kind of keep the song alive. And, and throughout our country, we've had different rules about singing, not singing, but I know in my own local community, there was a lot of very minimal singing, but singing from memory, you know, simple refrains. We really had to call on the people. And so that repertoire that came out of this tangible book, which had been removed from our church and packed up, boy, the weekend that we brought our hymnals back was really just I had one family with a little kid and they said, oh, our books are back. The little girl said, our books are back. I mean, I didn't think a fourth grade girl would say, our books are back, you know what I mean? And then some people, you know, didn't really notice, you know, because, you know, but that's just that with the pandemic and I think we've never tried to say through a hardbound hymnal that that's the only way. GIA has really never said that's the only way, but we really have held up the hardbound hymnal as the people's songbook, as this treasury. It's this thing that's immediate, that we don't have to wait for a screen to be prepared. We don't have to wait for a handout to be prepared. People can simply get there and sing, and it's there. So that's really been great. The other thing I'm really loving about a hymnal, because you know when you start in 2018, we've always thought about all these issues. What should we be singing about? Kate mentioned, you know, immigration, lament, racism. And what I love about the hymnal is the hymnal, if it's with the passion and the care of those texts, it really guards against cultural and church amnesia, so that in 3 months, we're not talking about racism anymore. Or we forget about it's not, you know, because our culture keeps bumping to the next thing. But the hymnal is kind of there to like keep us, hey, don't forget, lament's important. Hey, singing about racism and the, you know, getting, you know, and the sin, just getting, you know, kind of being healed from the sins of our world and the sins of our communities. So I really appreciate having that there for the people.
Yeah, I can see too that there are a number of liturgists on the call. So when I think with a liturgy-minded brain about a hymnal, my mind first goes to the experience of the senses, and even the idea that when you pick up the book, that there is a weightiness to it, that you can feel, you know, in the imprinting of even the cover, even before you open the book, you have this tactile experience with something that you know that lots of people before you have come into contact with, and people after you will come into contact with. And even this experience of touch of a book and an experience of holding a weight ignites your imagination in ways that without the experience of you know, it's a gift to have these things that we experience with our senses all around us when it comes to liturgy. And you know, when you look at the pages of these books, this one is empty, so don't look at this book. But when you think about this book holding all of the things that are bound up in our covenant with God, all of the ways that we talk to God, when, you know, when we're celebrating with God, and when we're angry with God, and when we're longing for God, all of those sentiments are held in here. And so are the tears that people have cried when they've sung those things that are hard to sing, or when they brought themselves to sing finally after, you know, the wall of rage or disconnectedness comes down. You know, and thinking about just this, the beauty of the idea of the weight of what this book means, what it means when I'll pass it to my daughter, who now, you know, can't hold it for very long because she's 4.5 and squirrely, but that will mean something to her someday. Those are the things that I think are, you know, even without the words on the page, and even before we sing the melody, those are compelling reasons to pursue an effort like a hardbound hymnal, and these are compelling reasons, I think, to engage with your music ministry staff and your parish staff to say this is really much more about. It's much more than just a conversation about a collection of songs that I like. It's about an investment in and symbol about what singing and praying together as community means. I could go on about that for a long time.
I'm going to go a little out of order here with some of the questions that are coming in. Someone had asked a question about just the general look and design of the book and things. Sometimes people ask questions like, how do you pick the color? You know, but one thing I'll mention, and unfortunately he's not here with us today, but the look of the book, all the graphic design was done by Dan Cantor, who did a beautiful job. And if any of you have seen prior to this, or when you look at some of the print materials, you'll see this beautiful, colorful cross that comes, it looks like it's coming together and it's forming a multitude of shapes and a multitude of colors. And this beautiful design has such a depth to it because Dan took a lot of the summation of conversation from the committee, like we've just heard, and put that into the design. And then, Kate, if you hold up the book itself, when it's open, it's printed on the spine. And I know it's hard to see, with the fully formed cross on the front, but the cross coming together from these various places on the back, which is what you in a tactile way hold as you're singing from the book. So there's such a kinesthetic connection, as well as the visual connection, as well as the oral connection, as well as the theological connection. It's really lovely. Leanne asks a question: besides songs that stand the test of time, or that you're willing to bet will stand the test of time, do you allow songs that may be more momentary in this time, whether the tune or the text, knowing it may not last till the next decade, but perhaps is very useful and helpful for now? It's a great question, Leanne. So maybe in the heart of that is how do you both place your bets on what's going to last, but also create something that is going to be relevant for this moment and not look past this moment?
I know that a lot of things relevant to this moment inspired a lot of the decisions. Like you'll see a lot of songs, that's a true Ritual Song second edition too. You'll see a lot of songs regarding creation and care for creation. And that has been a big focus of, Pope Francis's time. And so wanting to find a way to express that in solidarity with the Pope, but also because it's a good thing to learn how to express and teach and practice better. There are more texts that speak to how we can or should or must care for creation in this time. I think that's one tangible example. There's lots of ways that it might prove to stand a test of time, but we're certainly listening to the Spirit, now, and letting that inform some of those decisions to, in this instance, put in more texts that address that issue.
Yeah, that's also, I think, a great reason to just also to think about what you can do with your repertoire with one license. If there is something so specific that you want for a moment, like I think of like Carolyn Gillette, who often writes hymn texts that speak to a very specific issue or event, that probably wouldn't be something that would go in a hymnal that's meant to last for a long time, but it's still an opportunity to use those songs. Like, the hymnal doesn't, I think, block you from using anything that you want.
And I think that's always the balance. I think from hymnal to hymnal, we've always had repertoire. We always have to say, are people still singing this song? And so as a committee, we go back and we look at recording lists, and we try to find out as much as we can. But inevitably, some old song is going to be somebody's new song. That's just the way it is in Christian community. And yet some people are really hungry for more new songs. So we're always trying to balance that. And then I know, even with the music of the Iona community, they are so committed to social justice. And John Bell and the Wild Goose Worship Group composing texts, they realized that a lot of their texts were for the moment. Mm-hmm. And so we even found on hymnal committees, that some Iona songs would be in one hymnal, but maybe it had served its purpose. And even the Iona community would say, oh, that song served its purpose. It's time to move on to a new text. And we even see that in the Taizé community. Sometimes the brothers kind of do a deep discernment of just simple Taizé chants, that a lot of us have come to know, but they'll discern, in a very kind of thorough discernment that, oh, well, that text doesn't really work anymore. Or the young people come to us, that really doesn't help them in their relationship with God and community. So then you have to let go of those texts. So we've had a few examples within our various hymnal committees just try to kind of do that type of discernment also. And like you said, sometimes it's a crystal ball. We don't really know, but we just have to trust that the intention is really hopeful and positive and moving forward, with God's people. And sometimes God's people move so slowly, as we know. So we kind of got to wait for that too. So it's just always this balancing act. So
those types of discernments were frequent and they were very difficult. I think, especially trying to look to contemporary music that's out there these days. We didn't agree for a long time, and it was just very difficult. And then we started looking at texts and rewrites and things like that. But that's a very, very difficult thing to look into the future and say, this is going to make it. Or these are things that are still being sung, but are they really going to be sung, in 10 more years? We had those discussions. And then, even, looking at what the university community, is wanting to sing. And we also have with that faculty, staff, administrators, sisters in our congregation and community members. And even the students are coming from all over the country, all over the world, and they're saying, but we sing this. And sometimes it's not even the contemporary thing. It's something from way back, that's old school to them, maybe the 70s or the 80s, but for them it's new and it's wonderful, and they want to revisit that. So
I think one of the examples I can think of, it might not be the best example, but of some of what Leanne, you're talking about in terms of how needs for the moment affect the way we look at things, and Kate, your example of care for creation being introduced as a title of a section around the time that we see Laudato Si, and a big push, especially from the church, in terms of environmentalism and care for creation. I think of the hymn tune Melita, Eternal Father Strong to Save, the Navy hymn, which I know the committee also added additional verses specifically developed for natural disasters. Just coming from the last several years, and of course the effects of climate change. And we even just look at this year, the number of natural disasters, be they hurricanes and flooding or storms or wildfires. But again, another example that, of course, I'm willing to bet years from now there will still be hurricanes and flooding and wildfires. But for this moment, it was important to address that need because there was a gap. And I think that's a great example of the responsiveness that the committee takes. A couple of other questions here as we get close to our time. An anonymous attendee asks, are any of you who serve in parishes making a decision to order this new hymnal, no pressure, when it becomes available, or are you going to wait a time before making the decision to order this new hymnal for your parish? And I mean, again, I don't ask the question to put you on the spot, but I think it's interesting just to see how, even being on the hymnal committee, but also being practitioners, you think through the adoption and realities for a hymnal resource. So what do you think? Is Gather 4 in the cards?
I think
I am not in a parish as a music director right now, but I am really sad about that, because I would absolutely order this book for my community. It is so fun to even look through the table of contents, the indices, and imagine planning liturgy with the songs that are in there. I should let someone else talk.
I agree, Kate. I think I'm in the middle of Manhattan, and we have so many different ethnicities who worship with us on any occasion, and I wouldn't see a reason to wait, because I think one of the things as part of the committee, we really were intentional about the decisions that we were making. And, Gather has a brand, but how can we expand upon that and really bring more goodness into that brand? And I think we did it. So there's a great, it's eclectic, and it's very useful. It would be very useful in my pews. More useful than I think any of the other hymnals thus far, in terms of what's comprised in it.
Yeah, I think when I hear people ask, what like, who is Gather for? Is it for is it for a piano-based community? Is it for organ-based community, guitar? Is it for young people? Is it for, an early morning crowd? Who's it for? And the answer is yes. You can find yourself in here. You can find your own community in here. It has just an incredible wealth of traditional hymnody and chant, and lots of versatility available if you consider yourself an organ-based parish or a piano-based parish. I really think it's really representative of all types of worshiping communities.
I think it's representative of the fact that too, like those divisions of, the organ-based community, the guitar-based, piano-based are becoming more and more blurred, as well as, those barriers hopefully are getting broken down, and those collaborations are starting to happen more in people's music ministries. I know for my parish, the parish that I minister in now has only lived in to Gather 3 for about 5 years. They were kind of like late adopters to Gather 3. So like, just very personally and specifically, it would not be the time to adopt a new hymnal there. Now, my previous parish in Maryland that I left was an early adopter of Gather 3. So in my mind, it would be the perfect time to adapt Gather 4, and I would absolutely do that. I believe in the book, and if if someone was writing me a blank check right now at the place where I serve, I would absolutely feel good about moving toward Gather 4. I think people who have been holding on to Gather Gather Comp 2 and like the green ones, those are the ones, especially just something.
It might be time, folks. It might be time.
Something as pragmatic as having the correct mass translation of the mass in your hymnal. That's something to consider.
I can definitely see that as being something that we would do in our own place. We've, like Zach was saying, the pandemic showed us that we don't need to be bound by anything. Yeah. There is one license and all of that. But the GIA hymnals, we have a great collection of choir books. That's what we use a lot of for our choirs. And so I can see this happening. I can see the literature being used with our assembly. It already has been, a lot of the stuff that I know that's in the book. So it stood the test of time even in this year. So I think it would be a great purchase for us.
Zach, if anybody on the call does have a blank check, what's the best number that they
could Venmo it.
We are almost out of time, and I am going to ask Hymnal Committee, I'm going to ask you a question now, and I'm going to give you a second to think about it, just to formulate your response before we do a couple of things. And that question is, you brought so much of your experience and your individuality and your professionalism and the different settings that you've served in before to this committee and to this hymnal process. So I'm wondering if there's anything now, having been through these 3 years of discernment, that you bring back to your ministry. How does being on the hymnal committee cause you to minister differently today? So I'm going to ask you to share that in just a second. Part of the reason why I bring up, and this is now to all of you attending, part of the reason why I introduced that question wasn't before about, are you going to buy Gather 4? Wasn't to put our hymnal committee members on the spot or to get them to say, "Ooh, absolutely, of course," but was to also demonstrate, again, to further demonstrate that all of the people, both editorial, hymnal committee, the readers, the reviewers, everybody who was a part of this process over the last 3 years, are people who are living and breathing daily the exact same experience and exact same questions and considerations that all of you are as well. And so it's not this is not a book that's put together in a vacuum. It's not a book that's put together by people who buy new hymnals every couple of years. It's very much a in the trenches practicing practitioner crowd who's putting this book together, which is really exciting. second thing I want to say to end, and this is something from the beginning, and it might be a funny thing to maybe point out now. One of the things I'm so encouraged by about this book and about this hymnal committee process is something that you mentioned earlier, David, which was the strong opinions that people brought. And sometimes, and I don't say conflict meaning people fought or anything necessarily, but the passion with which people spoke about pieces in this hymnal, again, to emphasize that this was not a group of people who threw a bunch of things together and said, I could go either way on this. It doesn't really matter. It was a conversation of consequence, because all of you thoroughly knew and lived in your deliberations the fact that your decisions have consequence for all of the communities who are going to adopt this. And so I as soon as I heard that people disagreed vocally and literally and figuratively got on the table for things, I knew that this was going to be great and it's going to be a winner. Because if it was something that sailed through, it would not be the resource that it is today. So again, just to further emphasize the amount of care and consideration that went into this resource. So last business item, because I don't want you to sign off yet before you hear all of the final thoughts from our committee members. We have 3 more conversations. We had a conversation last week introducing Gather 4 and walking through some of the contents, especially service music, psalms, other digital features, Psalter, etc. You'll be able to see that archive video beginning today on our YouTube channel, on our social media channels, and on our website. You'll be able to see a recording of this again in the next couple of days, so you can come back to review this. Also, if you want to share it with colleagues, that would be wonderful. And then we have 3 further conversations, one this Thursday, one next Monday, and one the Thursday after. You can find links to register for all of those conversations on our website, giamusic.com. There will be conversations about representation and inclusion, inclusive practice in music ministry. And again, then going back to Gather 4. Next Monday, for myself personally, I'm excited about a conversation that Michael Silhavy will host on what resources like Gather 4 and what music ministry can do and should consider with new and emerging parish structures, with closures and mergers and area Catholic communities and partnerships, especially for a resource like this, where such high percentages of the hymns and songs section come from other publishers, bringing together, truly gathering songs from a variety of houses and a variety of backgrounds. It's an exciting opportunity. And then we'll be rounding out the 5 webinars, looking at the digital components that will be accompanying this hymnal. You'll also be seeing soon information about how to claim a digital review copy. So because you've registered for this webinar, we'll be sending you an email shortly with links so you can review the copy until you can request a physical copy, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. And also soon we'll be announcing the Gather 4 Hymnal Tour. So we hope that we'll be able to bring the book to you and to a group of people who can get together and sing in the near future. So please keep your eyes out for that. So we're going to go in the order that I see you. Final thoughts. Zak, as you think about going back now to your community at St. Francis, how has this hymnal committee process made an impact on the way you think about your ministry?
I had 2 thoughts about that. The first, just going back to the spirited conversations and the disagreements and the way that we discerned those songs, I'm reminded that I need to bring that same level of discernment and passion to my own liturgy planning. That, even today, when it's so easy to go to like a liturgy planning website or to, just remember what I did last year on the same Sunday, that my assembly deserves that kind of thought and discernment. And second, I'm reminded of how difficult it is to teach and introduce new music to a parish, but I'm reminded how worth it and important it is to do that work.
Great, thanks. Lena, how about you?
Well, I think, music is always meant to help people connect and be comforted and encourage people to change where change is necessary, to resonate with one another. And I think that experience of being on the committee really being, having had to stand in somebody else's shoes and say, you know, wait, you don't like that, you know, or that's not, you know, familiar to you. It really is something that I took home and brought to students, because I want music to be able to resonate with my community. I want it to be able to comfort. Otherwise, it's just sound. It's not really, you know, faith building and community building. David,
you're next on my screen.
Okay. Well, I think my experience with this pretty amazing committee really taught me to really, as a pastoral musician, to really keep working so hard and fighting for people to help them find their voice. And then really honoring the voices that are in your community. And this hymnal project kind of taught me to kind of stretch me a little bit, you know, repertoire, but, you know, just going to, you know, just thinking and hearing the voices of my colleagues and then sharing the voices of their communities. So really helping people, you know, fighting for the song. We literally had to fight for some songs, but it reminded me that we have to fight for the song. We have to really passionately work to kind of enable the song, and you have to use a lot of different things. It's not just one or two styles anymore, and so help everybody find their voice, honor those voices, and I certainly got stretched along the way. So it was really a great process. So I'm still very grateful for that.
Great. Mayor?
It's such a privilege, as everybody said, just working together as a committee. And I think that we did it with a lot of love. And there's a lot of love in this hymnal. And I always say that my primary job is to make people love Jesus more when they get to church than when they come in, through full and active participation. And I just seen my colleagues on this committee and how much they love what they do and the love that they put into everything that they brought to the table. I just think that the book is filled with that, and we carry that forward.
Wow.
Kate?
Yeah, it's the idea of making a new hymnal is daunting and terrifying, and the conversations where we don't always agree can kind of double down on that feeling of, I don't know what we're doing here. But there have been so many incredible signs of consolation along the way, that exactly what you're saying, that this is worth it. The endeavor to make a hymnal is worth it. The endeavor to have these tough conversations with one another is worth it. The endeavor to learn new pieces, even though it's hard to teach people a new song, it's worth it. One of those signs for me was that, when every hymnal gets vetted by, if there's a text that belongs to the bishops, the USCCB or ISIL, they make sure always that we use exactly the text that we're supposed to use. So you will be in full communion with the rest of the singing, praying church every weekend. But we also send it to a local censor. So in the Archdiocese of Chicago, there is a censor who gets assigned every hymnal project that we are about to put forward. And they have to approve of everything that we put in the book, not just the choices that we made, but also the language that is contained within those choices. Various hymnal projects, I'm sure David Anderson has a million stories about, have come back with, numerous requested changes from those censors, whether it be a tense change of a word or a removal of a verse or rejection of a song. In this process, and I do believe it's because we really went the extra mile to get all the perspectives that we were able to on the table, to have all the hard conversations. The censor came back for this hymnal with no changes requested. No changes requested. And I don't know another time when that's happened. Michael didn't seem to know another time when that's happened. But it's because we worked really hard along the way. We trusted each other. And I think we're trying to, emulate that thing that Pope Francis is trying to exemplify, that synodality thing where we're going to have this conversation together, even when we don't agree, and we're going to love each other through it, and we're going to be, we're going to be better for it. So those little pieces of consolation that have reminded me that we are better for doing this project together, for working together, for figuring out where our common ground is and where we need to go collectively next. I do think we are better. And the next sign of consolation is going to be when we can hear all of you singing from it too, and finding the things that you love about it, the things that challenge you, and in the ways that this book might help you grow in faith and love.
Great, thank you, Kate. Thanks to all of our panelists, really, truly, for being here, for all of your service over the last 3 years. Thanks to those of you who joined us live. Thanks to those of you who have been watching this recording after this date. And thanks again to all of you for all of the work that you do to serve your schools, your parishes, your communities. We know it's not easy. We know it's not easy in these times. And we really, truly are honored that it's our work and our job to be able to resource you and walk with you as you do this important ministry for your community. So thank you for spending the last hour with us. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out and ask us. And we'll see you on another GIA webinar soon. Thanks. God bless.
Thank you.
Thanks. God bless everybody.